Hi, this is Diana Layton, Youth Librarian at the Mark and Emily Turner Memorial Library in Prescott, Maine, here to present my February 2011 Teen Book Talk, where I will be talking about The Complete Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi. And this is the first graphic novel, as well as the first memoir that I've done a video book review for. And that's something that's becoming increasingly common in the book world, combining a graphic novel with a memoir. And I mean, for a lot of writers and artists, they're finding that having a more visual format is crucial for being able to tell their stories effectively. And that's definitely the case with Persepolis. The story follows Marjane as she grows up during the 1979 Islamic Revolution that occurred in Iran, and follows her, through the years that come after that. So when you start the story, she's quite young, and she grows all the way up into young adulthood. So when you open it, you'll notice this black and white style. You hit yourself in the face with the book. And that's basically the style throughout the book. And some people might say, gosh, that's kind of boring, or, if they want a more visual format, why go with something that's just black and white? But I think in this case, you have one part. We're actually dealing with the revolution and some of the grittier elements. There are moments through the story that are graphic, meaning if this was told in just a straight up text memoir, it would still feel graphic. I think to some extent, to know about brutal deaths and bombings and different things of that nature. And somehow having it in a black and white format gives you a chance to sort of, not necessarily breathe, but it becomes a little bit more accessible if you're comparing it to, say, a glossy photograph in a magazine or a non-fiction book or something like that. You know that this is brutal, you know what's happening here, but because those black and white illustrations stay consistent, you're able to kind of follow along through the story, through the good moments and the bad moments just the same. And at the same time, again, with the Islamic Revolution, we know about these cultural and social restrictions that happened at that time. It became a very conservative environment to live in. As you probably saw when I was flipping through here, men had to dress a certain way, or women dressing a certain way. And so there are some panels where you're just seeing a face and the rest of the panel is just black because of the robe. And, having that inky blackness, you really get a sense of the physical restrictions of having, a robe on, or just having this flowing fabric around you, as well as the cultural restrictions. So whether Marjane's family is throwing a party and it's sort of a joyous moment, even though it's an illegal activity, but they're having a good time, you have this blackness that surrounds them at all times. And that's the same as when they go into the basement during a bombing. It's just something that's all around them all the time. So I think that that's definitely a case where having it in a visual style is helpful. And it is simplistic. This is, a lot different from a text-based story, which maybe would end up being 6 times the size of this book, I'm not sure. But at the same time, it really does allow Marjane Satrapi to put a human face on a period of time that has a lot of perhaps stereotypes or misunderstandings placed on it. So now would be a good time to mention that when I picked this book for Teen Book Club, it was a couple months ago, and so it was before the political unrest that we're now seeing in North Africa and the Middle East. And so in recent weeks, I think a lot of Westerners and Americans have really had to reevaluate how we feel about that particular region of the world. And Iran is certainly no different. So knowing about the Islamic Revolution, I think there might be a segment of the population that feels like everyone in Iran agrees with this and believes with this. And I think what Satrapi is trying to show is that it's a lot more complex than that, and that there are everyday implications to these types of things. We see her family members in prison, we see her friends and neighbors die in bombings, but at the same time, we see her take part in kind of typical teenage activities like buying records and blue jeans. Um, and for the Western reader, you kind of go, oh, I do those different things. Or maybe you have, maybe you haven't. Um, but to think about it in the context of growing up in Iran, you realize what would normally be such a simple activity really becomes kind of a revolutionary activity. But it's also this commonality that we have for this region that is pretty misunderstood, or we don't know a whole lot about it. Again, it is a memoir though, so you only get Marjane's perspective on it, which is a very useful one. But I think a lot of people will want to go back and look at this deep, long history that really goes back into ancient times, and just all of the different influences. But for the graphic novel lover, I think this is a really good way to begin thinking about your understanding of that time. I think that was kind of what I experienced is when I initially read this, which was a couple of years ago, it was mostly because it was a graphic novel and I thought that was neat. I didn't know anything about the Islamic Revolution, admittedly, being born in 1981. And so this definitely brought a lot of things to my attention and helped me understand that a little bit better. And I think maybe gave me a better sense of when I am turning on the news, or now probably, reading blogs or different things on the internet, really understanding that there's always a human face to these different conflicts. And that's really what makes Persepolis so useful. And with that in mind, it's not a hard read. Again, as the story progresses, Marjane actually leaves Iran and, without her parents at a pretty young age, and goes through some pretty common experiences of young adulthood. And it really becomes about finding your identity, which is something we talk a lot about in these teen book reviews, but it's certainly the case here. And I think a lot of people would be able to identify that. Um, you know, maybe you're forced to kind of self-exile because of something like a political conflict, or maybe there's some other reasons. But I do think that that journey to understand yourself and find your identity and figure out how you can belong when you have so many different factors influencing you, it's just going to be something that's going to be pretty accessible for a lot of people. And again, along the way, you also get a great historical perspective on a region that is so commonly misunderstood. So for that, I recommend the complete Persepolis, and I'll leave it at that, and I will see you guys next month. Thanks!